only considering women and people of color, because we have confused diversity with race and gender, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe religion.
Okay.
But generally, people think of race and gender, and it's much more broad. For example, in my definition, everybody's diverse because it
Yes.
includes the unique things about you, the way, the community in which you're born, the things that you've learned, your birth order, your age, which generation you are. All of
Mm-hmm.
those things contribute to it. I mean, race, gender, and religion are just three aspects of who you are. There's so much more to us, that
Mm-hmm.
makes us who we are. It's your perspectives, your opinions, and all those things are shaped. It could be the education you pursued to use the talents that you have. So it could be
Hey, Style Crew, we are back for another episode of Style and Conversation. Like I shared with you all last week, we are kicking off a new series specialized for the upcoming election. This is a historical moment in our history, as are all presidential elections. But there are so many topics that are buzzing around this election. And I wanted to take time to bring in some experts to talk about these topics and also some topics that you may not be hearing a lot of buzz around, but things that we should also be considering as we go to cast our vote in November or in October if you're voting early, which I highly encourage. So, to kick off this series today, we have Miss Cherie Caldwell. She is the CEO of the Cherie Caldwell Company. And I'm going to kick it off by reading over her bio because I know you all are going to be super impressed after you hear from her today. Cherie Caldwell is a human resources thought leader with over 2 decades of experience. She's the former Region VP of Human Resources for Comcast NBC Universal, Director for the Home Depot, Managing Director for Delta Airlines, and Head of DE&I for SalesLoft. In 2023, Cherie rebranded and launched the Cherie Caldwell Company to help leaders and companies connect the dots between their teams and business results. She aids in the transformation of performance and productivity by helping leadership teams and individuals resolve internal conflicts, turn high achievers into cohesive teams, and increase team effectiveness. So, Style Crew, we are welcoming Cherie into the podcast for this exciting conversation. Cherie, welcome. And I cannot wait for everyone to hear from you. I know they're going to be wowed by all the knowledge that you have to share with us.
Jessica, I'm so excited to be here and to connect with you. This has just been amazing. I know you and I have had many conversations now, getting ready for this. I'm just impressed with your podcast, with you pulling things together, how you create the space for differing perspectives to be shared, and how you're willing to share that and be that space for your audience and for people. So it's really incredible and amazing. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I just did my makeup, so you have me actually about to cry, but I received that. Thank you. Thank you so much. And the podcast wouldn't be what it is without guests of your caliber willing to come on and share their talents and their knowledge with the world. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you for being able to share this space with us today.
Thank you. And it's funny that you say that because I know you asked me how did I get on this journey, and this
Yes.
not even in my thought process, but what you just said really triggered this for me.
Mhm.
Was around all of us have talents, and
Yes.
if we bury them, they don't shine, right? And the goal of the talents that were gifted to us was for us to multiply them and to use them. And
100%.
what I find from being in this work is that we all have talents. We don't necessarily know how to multiply them. Some of us have had our talents, we've been discouraged from using our talents, we've been
Right.
oppressed from using our talents, and then others are afraid to use their talents. So we don't. And then the world doesn't benefit when we don't do that, right? So for me, this work has really been about maximizing the potential of all of us right? And I think of a world when we all live up to our potential, it's amazing to me what we'd create, what we'd solve, what we'd have in terms of community. And I feel like that's the lesson we're here to learn, right? And we get tripped up by doing the us versus them, by having a scarcity mindset, right? And so then we don't share our talents, or we don't share information, or we don't do things because of those fears. But that's not the purpose for our being here, right? We're not supposed to live in fear. We're supposed to live in love. And part of that is really using our talents for the gift of everybody, not just ourselves. And so the more we use our talents, or the more we're accepting of others' talents, the more we create the space of inclusion. And it comes down to everybody has talents regardless of what we look like, right? So it's not just about marginalized people. The marginalized people are a lesson for us to understand why we did that, why we still do that, and what we need to do to overcome that so that we can benefit from the talents of all, right? And so we have to include everyone in that. There is no us versus them, it's just all us. And how do we create the space for all of us to shine? And I think that's been the question that I've always wanted to answer. And the things that I seek and search for is always about how do we connect the dots so that we create a space where we're not worried about a World War III. We're not worried about extreme violence. You know what I mean? It's like that. Those are things that don't make sense when you consider the intelligence of humans. Those things don't make sense. So we're missing something. And part of that is inclusion. And part of that comes from recognizing that we're all diverse, and that equity is not about giving us all the same amount of money or moving things around that. It is about recognizing that we all have talents and allowing the space for those talents to flourish and grow. That's kind of how I see it. Now you have to put that
I
into simple terms, but yes.
No, so I'm so grateful that you shared this, and I want to take a pivot for a moment to expand upon what you said, everything that you said, because I feel it's all important. So I agree with you 100% that we all have talents within us that don't just benefit us, but they benefit the world around us. And so for me as a believer, the word says, "Let your light shine before others."
Right,
And to be transparent, that's something that I've been trying to sharpen and walk more in boldness and stop playing small and stop shrinking myself within certain spaces and just within the world in general, feeling the need to conform, assimilate, and just not be who I'm called to be, because by doing that, I'm actually being disobedient to the gifts that have been placed inside me. And then, just like you said, the world can't be a better place, because
right,
imagine the world that we would live in if everyone had the space and the confidence to boldly walk out the talents that have been placed within them to
right,
create a better
right,
world.
right.
And so, in relation to this conversation, I want to ask you, based on your opinion as well as your experience, do you feel that inclusion creates, like, nurtures the space for us to show up in that way in a professional setting, like a civic engagement setting, whatever that may be, something that is outside our home and outside our normal tribe? What
Right.
would you say?
I think it does, but I think people feel that it's that inclusion is around only considering women and people of color, because we have confused diversity with race and gender, and
Mm-hmm.
and maybe religion.
Okay.
But generally, people think of race and gender, and it's much more broad. For example, in my definition, everybody's diverse because it
Yes.
includes the unique things about you, the way, the community in which you're born, the things that you've learned, your birth order, your age, which generation you are. All of
Mm-hmm.
those things contribute to it. I mean, race, gender, and religion are just three aspects of who you are. There's so much more to us, that
Mm-hmm.
that makes us who we are. It's your perspectives, your opinions, and all those things are shaped. It could be the education you pursued to use the talents that you have. So it could be the degree that you have, or the fact that you didn't get a degree and you went into a trade school. Any of
Mhm.
those things make you diverse. So
Mhm.
we're all diverse. If you had a room full of people that look the same, all men
Mhm.
that were engineers, there would be so much diversity because we have to look beyond that. So when I
Okay.
think of inclusion, I think of it as creating this safe space for people to share and to give who they are. I do think you need boundaries. I don't think it's all full out acceptance. We want to have some norms set, right? Like it's not okay to yell at people. Like the norms about like not murdering people is,
Right.
is a very good norm to have. So it's not full out, just be you. It is be you with respect for other human beings and other life. It is be you within like some normal societal constructs that help us behave well with each other,
Okay.
right? But they don't limit us or shut us down from sharing who we are and what we have. So one of my best examples, it's an old story, but it goes back to when the Challenger exploded. There would have been a lot of research done about the group think that was going on in NASA at the time. And the fact that the
Mhm.
culture shut down, and I'm just paraphrasing, right? Like, don't
Yeah,
quote
of
me as
course.
it's what the research said, but the
Mhm.
culture helped shut down people being able to, like, who could push back and who couldn't, right? So if
Okay.
somebody said this, like maybe it was an engineer, like pushing back on that, like you had to prove them wrong versus prove there should be some doubt, right? And so we got caught up in the wrong things. And because that situation could have been prevented, had there been a space of safety for people to speak up and talk about it. And had there been a space for safety that we didn't worry about the um, the optics of how it looked to have another delay, right?
Right.
So we put priorities on, and so we would challenge ourselves on where we put the priorities because you do have to prioritize, but there would
Right.
have been a challenge that could have led to a different decision, that could have led to discussion. And maybe a person was wrong, but it would have been on the table for
Mhm.
things to consider and the risk evaluated, right? And so
Right.
for most of us, it's not going to result in an explosion of a shuttle, right? Or a spaceship. But there could be an explosion in our relationships. There could be an implosion in our companies, right?
Right.
So inclusion is to me, psychological safety, a skill set maybe around managing conflicts. I think when you allow for all those different points of view, you have to have the space and the maturity around how to manage conflict and how to create the space for it. I find I work with great leaders that know how to have the devil's advocate in the room, then that understand that tension of challenging actually sharpens up the idea. So even if you still move forward in a certain direction, you've considered all the pitfalls because you allowed the conversation to happen. So inclusion is a combination of creating space for different ideas and allowing those ideas to come to the table. It doesn't say we're going to go to consensus or that we're going to dummy down the decision, make everybody happy. It just says all the voices will be heard so that we have all the information that we need to make better decisions. And if everybody has the same information, chances are we'll kind of finagle our way towards a decision that makes sense without um, trying to make everybody happy and go to consensus, because that doesn't always lead to the best decision. It just leads to one where everybody won't be angry, right? So it's not about trying to make people happy and hold hands. It's about making sure all the voices are heard, the relevant information is in the room so that work can get done. The best work can get done.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So, no, that makes perfect sense. And to be honest, I'm going to put myself in the hot seat. You
Okay.
definitely, the information you shared, it just convicted me in this moment because being a Black woman, I'm from Mobile, Alabama. So I got accustomed to being, if not one of few, the only one in the room.
Yes.
Um, even during my time at the company you and I met at, I
Yes.
was the only one on that particular portion of my team, not the marketing team as a whole, but
Right.
that particular portion. And that is not uncommon. So for me to tie it into what you just said, when I walk into these spaces and I see a room full of white people, white men, my mind doesn't go to, oh, this is a diverse space. My mind
Right.
goes to, I've feel somewhat limited in this space.
Yes.
Everyone looks the same. Now, granted, there is a slight shift in my mindset depending on someone in that space, depending on their sexual orientation, if they are outwardly expressive of that. But typically, I have not felt that that was a diverse situation. Now, what I will say is, I am someone who has the belief that we all have a story.
Right.
So I take an interest in in the art of conversation and getting to know people.
Yes.
Relationships is one of the values that I hold dear to my heart. So I
Yes.
am someone who will engage people in conversation and allow them the space to share who they are. So after a few minutes, I'm able to realize, oh, Dave isn't like John. They're
Yes.
both great men, but Dave's experience, John might have grown up with a silver spoon, but John, his parents grew up poverty level. He had to work hard, get to a certain level to
Right.
attain what he attained. And, there's differences. But at
Right.
first sight, I don't see that. So
Right.
now when I walk into a predominantly Black space, I'm like, Wakanda forever, my people,
Yes.
there's diversity. It's oh, we're at the cookout. Like, even in a
Yes.
professional setting, there's just a certain like that. When you're the only one and you make eye contact, there's a certain look. Like, all my Black people that have worked in corporate, we know the look. You don't have to say anything, it's just a simple nod.
It's the thing I'm not alone. Right.
Yeah, you're not alone. So you got a war buddy. So
Yes.
you're educating me in this moment, and I appreciate that, because that's what I want to come out of this conversation. And that is one of the amazing things about you having this knowledge and experience. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I never would have considered that
Right.
prior
I
to
think
this.
it's the thing of knowing that, and the thing that's triggered for you is that in the past you haven't been safe when you walked into those types of settings. So one
No.
of the things I really espouse is that we cannot blame and shame ourselves and others, not in this time. Blaming
Yeah.
and shaming are non-productive and can be barriers to actually having the conversation, right?
Right.
So the give yourself credit, because the willingness to engage in conversation to get to know is that thing that starts to make a difference. It's
Mhm.
the communication that starts to open us up to things, right? And I think that for all of the ways that people have been marginalized, one of the things we don't always recognize is how we've marginalized ourselves. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is that biases and limiting beliefs have been passed down from generation to generation, and we can internalize those so that we can, as women, think of ourselves inferior and feel like we have to prove something, right? Or we can as people of color, or we can as people of LGBTQ, and sexual orientations that are different from others. We can, as people with differing abilities, neural divergent, all of those types of things that we can say, oh, people have viewed me as. And so we've internalized it, and we don't realize that we might be looking at ourselves that way. So
Mhm.
the first thing around inclusion is to look for those limiting beliefs within ourselves and free our own minds, right? And start to look at where we can insert ourselves into spaces. Because not all spaces are hostile still, but sometimes we perceive them that way. Not that there aren't, because don't get me
Right.
wrong, those bias, but I'm saying the more we free ourselves up, the more we embolden ourselves to step in those spaces to initiate the conversations versus waiting for someone to create that space. Now, we
Right.
also have to work in tandem, because there is a society, there are structures in place, and there's a socialization cycle that has occurred, right? And it's, I mean, it happens everywhere, and it can be a smaller size thing as well as a nationwide thing, as well as a universal thing. I look at a universal thing as like how women are treated across cultures, for example, right? And how there's a limited view around their capabilities in certain places. That has a global feel to it. Um, Racial things can be a little bit different, right? Like I feel like there is an American version of that, right? And
Mhm.
there's also some other, because other countries participated in slave trade. There's also some other nuances, but then there's places where it's not about that. It's about economic status or caste systems or
Mhm.
things like that, where the racial qualities are very similar, and so there's not that much of a division. So there's things where we, us and they, us and
Right.
them, ourselves all over the place. And so that comes about from the cycle of socialization. So it starts when you're young. You might be given um, a pink or blue blanket because we only see as a world like two, right? and so,
Mhm.
and so we ignore other things, and then you're told how to behave based on that. You're told how to behave based on your standing in the family. You're told how to be based on your community, what to believe, how to act, all of those things. Then you go to school and you get, told what to learn, and you're told what to believe from that end and what your history is. And then you learn from society and you learn from the students, and you're watching TV, you're seeing movies, all these places where some of those things are really reinforced. And the really crazy part is that if you try to push against the systems, there's rewards and there's punishments, right? That
Right.
you act a certain way, you can be promoted. But if you're too outspoken and too, you may not be, and you may be exited, right? And I don't
Right.
just mean from a company, I mean from a family. It could happen, in society in general. It can happen. Like, who do we ignore? Who do we pay attention to? And then there's ways and backlash that happens, right? So there's this whole thing around, banning books and things like that. Like, it's going to
Mhm.
make a difference. Well, I think that happens because of cognitive dissonance, right? We cannot we get real uncomfortable holding on to opposing beliefs, right? It's like
Mhm.
trying to justify yourself when you're cheating on your diet, right? Like, how do you hold the space for that? It makes you uncomfortable, you know?
Right.
And so I think there's, you know what I'm saying? So I think the thing is that in this country, and this is my perspective and opinion, so let me make sure that I don't come across as this is the way it is.
Mhm.
Um, and my perspective and opinions come from reading research. I'm not a researcher, but I read, right? So looking at Brene Brown, looking at Rohini Anand, looking at Mary Frances Winters, looking at other authors of things that I've written, of people that do the research, even thinking fast and slow, right? Like how our
Mhm.
brain works. All of these things come to me in a way that connects the dots. And it says that, we've had these ideas passed down for generations. There
Mhm.
are still people who believe that why do we give women the right to vote, right? And so there's this thing about the role you should play, and when people don't do that. And so when people see evidence to the contrary, oh, we see that there are people of color that are very smart and very successful,
Mhm.
so that women that can handle power and do things, and all of the things that we be, oh, a woman can be an astronaut. Oh, a person of color can be president. All
Mhm.
of these things start to distort our belief around how the world is. And
Mhm.
so there's that reaction, or I call the backlash, to things that don't support my belief. And
Right.
some of that I can have compassion for because it's coming from a place of insecurity. Because when you do an us and they for so long, you feel a need to grab space for yourself and try to make yourself feel superior. Why do we even do that? Like, why do
Oh.
we even do that? And so, if you're trying to do that, then the more you see other people successful and not fitting your frame of reference, then you want to push back against it, or you can't handle it. So, you look for ways to shut that down to reinforce your own point of view. So I'm saying that there's probably some insecurity. There's probably this fear of what we don't know,
Mhm.
and really, you were giving yourself a hard time. But really, if people were like you and just would reach out and have a conversation and build a bridge or build a relationship, we'd learn not to fear, not
Mm.
because the person's just different. We might start to look at their character and go, I have some questions, you know.
Right.
Yeah, I
But
have
at
some
least
questions for you.
making the
That's
first
different.
step.
Yes, but there's a difference between just automatically assuming that you're Jewish, you're black, you're white, you're Asian, you're a female, you're gay, you're ADHD. All of that stuff, like, surface, irrelevant.
Okay.
It adds to the aspects of who they are as people, or who we are as people. They provide that um, that difference in opinion and perspective, but all of that is where invention comes from. All of that is where creativity comes from. Like the fact that you look at the human history and you think about how fast we've advanced, how quick technology moves, it's because we have a space for that. And the more we create more space for that through inclusion and psychological safety in spaces, the more of that we'll get, the more of the problems we can solve. Part of it is addressing the insecurity and the greed of those who have a lot of power, a lot of funding, a lot of
Mhm.
other things, a lot of opportunity, um,
Mhm.
and helping them see that having other people have opportunity doesn't necessarily take that away. Giving women the right to vote didn't take away the right to vote for men. It allowed more people in the conversation.
Mhm.
Granted, when you do that, other people get to have a say and it doesn't just get to go your way.
Right.
I get that too. I'm not saying there aren't trade-offs. There are,
Mhm.
and that I'm oversimplifying for all the complexities and the systems that might exist, but it's a starting point. It's a starting point. And that's kind of how I look at it. And I think that because of that fear, if we can start to look at ourselves as women, people of color, neurodivergent, all of the things that we are, and make sure that we are not limiting ourselves or that we've addressed the limiting beliefs that we've gotten because we've been socialized with them and start to recognize that they're not true, we can step into spaces with a lot more confidence and help shift them. And we could do it in a way where we don't have to prove something so that we can also reach out and build a bridge, not just start a fire.
Oh, I like that last part. Can you expand on starting a bridge and instead of starting a fire?
So I feel like sometimes we want to come out blazing, like we feel we've been unfair. We want to tear things down. We want to destroy the structures that we feel have oppressed us. I'm not saying that's not the goal.
Mhm.
What I'm saying is, and we may want to react and tear down the people. Like for example, the whole thing with Florida, with or let's not even just focus on Florida, just the whole stop woke is because people
Mhm.
understand what it is, and there's this feeling that I'm going to lose something.
Right.
So if you go in and attempt to just like destroy that because that's just too much. Let's stop these people from book banning. Let's stop this. You're not. You're adding to the fear.
Okay.
You're adding to the fear because you're going and crushing. And so now that person's going to what? Want to shut down even more, try to protect even
Mhm.
more. Versus
Mhm.
building a bridge that's like back to I have some questions. Can you help me understand? Or why do we do this? What if? What I'd
Mhm.
like? And I think that it's not about enabling. It is about compassion, but there's something I call ruthless compassion. So the compassion is I understand, I know where you're coming from, or I'm here to understand where you're coming from. But the ruthless part is, but I'm not putting up with things staying the way that they are. I'm not putting up with you not being your best and me not
Mhm.
being my best.
Mhm.
I can have compassion for you, but I'm asking you to step beyond and to be bigger than your fears and to
Mm.
help me find solutions that benefit all. Right.
Mhm.
And so it's an invitation into the conversation, but it's not coming from a place of weakness or being a doormat.
Yeah.
It's coming from
Okay.
a place of let's not follow in the footsteps of those who have dehumanized people in order to feel better about themselves. Let's not do the same. Let's find a better way, demonstrate the better way, do the better things, and role model those things and step into who we're meant to be utilizing the talents that we have.
Okay. I like that.
Yeah,
I feel like I can apply that not just in a professional setting, but also in my personal life
exactly.
as well.
Right.
I like that.
We take us with us wherever we go, right? Now, I know
Mm.
we talk about some historical things and things like that, and I was looking over the questions, and I remembered you asked me about like the history from like affirmative action to DEI, and I bring it up because sometimes that affirmative action is what is a source of fear for some folks,
Right.
and because there are a lot of myths about that. For example, people have asked me throughout my career, "What about quotas?" That they think those are unfair, and I was like, "Where are you getting that? Quotas? stopped being a thing. They were, denied by the Supreme Court before I even began my professional career. Like, this is so old. That's
Can
like,
you educate us on that? Because I do want to explore the fear behind
right.
that. And well, hold on. I want to give you a chance to spotlight. So hold on one second. So
Yeah.
tell us, what, so tell me about your journey with DEI first, and
Okay.
then why this field is important to you. And I'm going to bookmark that for when we come back to that conversation, that portion of our conversation, because it is important.
Okay.
But I want to highlight you for a second.
Um, DEI was a term that came up later, right? Like, I didn't
Hmm.
know that was the thing.
Hmm.
I think I went to a high school in a very diverse community. And I
Okay.
grew up in Columbia, Maryland. The symbol was the people tree, and everybody was from someplace else. And the
Okay.
neighborhoods were very mixed. So there was a concept there that was different than in other places. And I
Okay.
could feel it when I went to visit other places. But I think what really started is I was invited to be a peer counselor. And so I started to look at why was I making judgments about other people, that broaden it to why do we make judgments without seeing all that is in front of us. And then as I, went into my professional career, became then why do we dismiss obvious talents and capabilities in organizations? Like, what is that? Like, what is that happens?
Hmm.
And, I didn't know the word bias at the time, but I could understand that people had beliefs. And you can hear it in the rhetoric. You've heard it when people say, oh, well, they're not as qualified. No, where did that belief come from? Right.
Hmm.
Um, or women can't do that job. Or, now we hear, oh, she's a DEI hire, as like the only reason. And it's because of these beliefs around people being inferior, or not as good as, that have been passed on without evidence, right?
Hmm.
So, and to be fair, our history doesn't plays a role, right? Because there was a
Hmm.
point in time where people of color and women weren't really educated.
Right.
So you could say people didn't know or they weren't talented, but the truth was that people got educated and people got experiences and people got chances. Some
Hmm.
people weren't given chances. So affirmative action really came about from being um, a process or creating a set of procedures that
Hmm.
would allow more people to have opportunity. It didn't guarantee hiring. It didn't necessarily improve the numbers. It just said you had to have good faith effort and show. So, for example, if you're going to post a job, then put equal opportunity on the bottom. Did it mean that more women and people of color got hired? Not necessarily, right? But it
Right.
meant that you got the chance to maybe get an interview, or that people would look at your resume versus discount it, right?
Hmm.
However, we didn't really know how to address biases. So you could still have a bias where someone could not, and they actually can't see because it goes against their belief system, right? This is back to the cognitive dissonance. So if I believe that women are less than or should be at home and they're applying for a certain job, I might not see their full experience. I see that they're a woman. And so I automatically see this man as better, and so that's the obvious choice.
Okay.
So if you're not aware of biases and how they work and how it happens to you, then you could be doing that. So I'm just curious and I'm growing in my career and I read and I look and I understand. And part of what triggered me was trying to understand, why do people do that? Like, how can you miss someone that's really talented in front of you? Like, how does that
Right.
even happen? And I
Right.
think that those things, and looking to, my job in HR was how to make the team stronger, how to make us more productive, how to help us. What are the things we can do to make people more engaged? So
Mhm.
out of that work, these are things that I'm looking for. And so I
Mhm.
always was in a space of wanting to help us use the best talent.
Mhm.
Diversity, equity, inclusion came around. It was just, this is another foundational piece about how to use the best talent, right? It is, to me, it's a part of a bigger picture, but it's the part that has us examine bias and understand. So if we got into a space where we could actually do no blame and no shame and just be curious about it, we could say, oh, you know what? I was raised to believe that women should be more nurturing and less, um, confrontational. So that's why I don't see sometimes a person being in a leadership role, because I think this leadership role might be confrontational. When that's quite contrary, if I really look at it, individual women are going to have different skill sets. And then there's
Right.
also research that says that women are better leaders, probably because they're more inclusive and more nurturing. So look at the research, so there's a lot out there that can actually help us address the beliefs that we have and start to shift them based on facts versus on generational information that's been passed down that we just believe,
Yeah.
right? Because someone said it must be true. The fact that to say that women are inferior, not as good as, is not a fact. There may be some women who are not as good as, and there's some women who are even better. To say that people of color are a certain way, or to say that LGBT people are going to act more emotionally, or to say something about Jewish people or Muslim people, when you don't know and you're operating off of inaccurate information because you haven't explored it, you haven't been curious, you haven't gone and learned things about the community that you're describing, you're operating from an information deficit. And I think that if we could look at it that way, we wouldn't shame and blame ourselves. We would just get curious and we would ask. We would seek for information. We would look to understand. And as a leader, you want the best people on your team. To know that you've been overlooking people and you could actually shore up your team is a very powerful perspective to have. It can shift the nature of your productivity and your team performance greatly just because you opened your eyes. And that's really it. So for me, my journey started out with questioning why and looking at what we could do, and being in the space of human resources, being asked to help make teams more powerful, make the business more powerful, or gain more productivity. My research just led me into these things that said, really, we are in our own way
Oh,
because we miss looking and seeing the talent that's in front of us. And we overlook it and we think, oh, well, we should promote this man or we should promote this person for whatever reason versus seeing that there's other talented people around. And I think that just had me in the spot of what can you do about it? And then started looking at education, not shaming and blaming, but education, asking questions, exposing ideas, sharing what I'm reading, sharing what I'm seeing, looking at ways to start conversations. That's really what it comes down to start conversations and to ask. I asked a person one time, we had a situation at a company that I was at where we
mhm.
had open position. Top candidate was a white male, clearly the best candidate for the job. Offered the person the job, they turned it down. There were two other candidates. One, a little less qualified, but equally talented. Do you know what I mean? Like the other
Okay.
person was clearly the heads and above, but this person was very solid, very there. And then there was a junior person. The person here was someone from a marginalized community. I'll just leave it at that. The other
Mhm.
one was a white male, very junior. The person hired the junior person. So I
Hmm.
said, was bias at play here? Do we discriminate? I don't know. I can't make that judgment off of all that I've seen, but what I can say is then we should have a conversation. We should say, why did you make that decision? It doesn't seem obvious to me. Maybe the other candidate admitted something in the interview that would have us question their integrity. Maybe the
Mhm.
other candidate said something, or maybe there was some information that we don't have. So it's not accusing or blaming or shaming, it's being curious and understanding why. And if it turned out that there was a bias, then there's a chance for that conversation for us to look at what would be the better decision. And so if you have a check and balance and you allow for the recruiter to challenge the manager to go, why did we do that? Or to start a conversation or to even flag it, we start to look at how can we better our own processes? How can we better our teams by watching out for the things that we may be introducing into our decision making that are limiting us, right? And so, and the thing about biases is that we all have them. So if we understand that if you're human and you're breathing, you've got biases, there's no need to shame and blame. It's only to ask, is there a bias at play that's preventing us from making the better decision? And that, I think, is a question we can ask in all areas of our life. And all of us can be asking that. All of us, we all have biases, right? And so it's
Right.
recognizing recognizing that. And when I think about it, like the way our brains work, and I know we talked briefly about thinking fast and slow, looking at Kahneman's book on that end, it's the way our brains process information. We categorize things because there's too much that comes into us for us to process it all. So just imagine you have like a little file cabinet and just put stuff in there because it's like a ridiculous amount of information that comes at us per second. And
Right.
so our conscious side can only take in so much. And the thing is, we think that because we're aware or making a decision, I want to be a fair person, I want to be open, I want to be inclusive, I want to do all those things that help empower my team. We think that's it, but it's not. You have this whole other side of your brain that will drop stuff in based on all the information that's come out. So all the ways you've been socialized, all the ways you grew up in your family, all the things that you believed, that you've been taught, all of that comes into play. So even if you make a conscious decision that I think women are equal and are fair, and I would never do that, you might find yourself saying, oh, wow, I hope she can do this, right? It's all of us. And it's understanding that we're human, that we have biases, and that it's an opportunity to explore why we believe what we believe and challenge the things that have been passed down to us so that we can look at how we can create new things in the future. And I think that's it. That's it. The only difference I think is that I've been curious and I've explored this path on why these things have, like, why do we hate? Why do we have that kind of
Mhm.
thing? It just didn't make sense to me. And it started to root into biases, as well as just, insecurities and all the things that have made us human. It's like all those things are things to explore. And we have information and knowledge available. It's just a lot. And clearly, like, go back to talents, we all had them. We're not going to be expert at everything. I my one of my oldest is totally into politics. He knows way more about what's going on in the election than I do. That's his thing.
Mhm.
But I know way more about what's going on with people than he does, right? And like how to have those conversations, because that's my thing. That's why sharing our talents is so important, right? We can't all know everything. And so let's explore, let's ask questions, let's know. And so I went down this path. And so back to your point about the difference between affirmative action, DEI, it was just an evolution. People wanted to put something in place to try to mitigate discrimination, to try to end its recurrence. And it
Okay.
was never intended to be a quota system. So when that came out, that was squashed. And it's about good faith efforts. It was never a force to hire. Now, people probably distorted it. There are probably people who said, oh, I now got to hire people. And so they just went and hired people who may or may not have been qualified. So there's probably examples that people have all of, because we can find examples of people that hire people
Mhm.
that qualified just so they could say they're meeting the thing, or maybe in their bias they never thought they could find a qualified person, so they never looked, and they thought they had to do something, so they totally, made a mockery out of what they were doing by putting people in places that they shouldn't have been, right? So
Okay.
even if people were doing it out of the goodness of their own heart, the way they did it, they didn't understand how they were at play in it. Now, a
Okay.
good example where that didn't happen was the Tuskegee Airmen. So they wanted to have a chance to fly. The one thing that happened that I think made all the difference is that they didn't lower the bar. They didn't change the standard on what it took to be a pilot. And then they ended up having these squads, right, of
Right.
people that ended up having the better records overall. Not that they never lost the mission, but they lost far fewer than the other teams. And so clearly they were top of the game. So it totally blew out of the water that, Black people couldn't be pilot. Well, in this case, Black men couldn't be pilots and they couldn't be successful and they weren't as good at it. All of the data was totally against that. They came in under the same standards, higher, and produced better results. Maybe they were motivated to prove themselves, who knows, but they had the skill set and they brought their talents to the table and used them.
Hey, Style Crew. I want to talk to you about the sponsor of the first season of the Style and Conversation podcast, which is Bite Authority. I am holding their multi-collagen protein, which is the very first product that introduced me to their brand as a whole. So I came across their multi-collagen protein after doing about a month of research to find the right collagen for me and my lifestyle. And I was looking for a collagen from a reputable company that had customer service that was available, that provided the daily recommended dosage of collagen, didn't include any sugar. They had a variety of flavors that appealed to me, or non-flavor in case I wanted to include it in my coffee or a smoothie one morning. And that's how I came across Bite Authority. I gave it a shot 1 month, and after that, I was hooked. I became a recurring customer. And now, 2 years later, they are a sponsor of our first season. So, because of that, we have a special code for the listeners of Style and Conversation, which is styled by Jess. That code is spelled STYLEDBYJESS, and that will get you 15% off their entire collection of products. In addition to their collagen, they have a variety of products for your lifestyle, whatever your needs may be. They have several supplements and tablets. So, one of the tablets that I consume a couple of times per week is the Melt PM. And this actually aids in sleep support, appetite control, metabolism boost, and helps to reduce cravings, to help with all of the things that aid with maintaining a healthy weight for us ladies. And so this is another product of theirs that I really love. And they have, like I said, a variety of products for whatever you're looking for. So, just to tell you a little bit more about Bite Authority, at Bite Authority, we believe everyone should be able to take their health into their own hands, and we envision a future where health and nutrition products are found on counters in every single household. We pride ourselves on being an absolute authority when it comes to health and wellness supplements, and set the standard on providing high quality, science based, clean, tested, and proven products for every person from every walk of life. Bite Authority can now be found at GNC retail stores as well as other retailers nationwide, and has gone international in Canada, the Dominican Republic, Panama, the Caribbean, and Africa. For more information about Bite Authority and our commitment to promoting women's health, wellness, and active lifestyles, please visit www.biteauthority.com. And that is spelled BITAUTHORITY. All right, make sure you use the code Styled by Jess, and then let's jump back into this episode.
And most people don't know that. There hasn't been that case, right? And most of the time in my own personal experience, I found that in order to, and I'm talking as an HR leader, so looking across the board at how people are hired, not just me personally, but I found that
Mm-hmm.
in order to get hired, sometimes you had to be really top notch in order to be at the other candidates.
Yeah.
So my experience is quite the opposite is true, that women and people of color tend to be a little bit more qualified in order to get the roles they get. And then, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they don't maybe get the same pay, but they get the job. So I think it's the affirmative action was really around how do we create equal opportunity so that people get it.
Okay.
Um, I think there were places where it got morphed, and then it probably was unfair because it was looking to fill quotas or lowering standards, and I think that wasn't fair. Who wants to be
Mhm.
hired off a lowered standard and have their capabilities, questioned? Nobody wanted that, right?
Exactly.
And so if it occurred and where it occurred, probably created the conversation. And maybe it didn't occur, but people just believed it did.
Mm-hmm.
But but I will say there was a case that brought quotas to the Supreme Court. I don't remember Baki, maybe I don't remember which case it was, but it was back in the late
Mm-hmm.
70s. So again, before I'm even doing my professional career, the quotas had been gone for a long time, but people still think it exists. And this is what I mean by information and generational knowledge passed down, and people don't question. People don't.
Okay.
So for me to be questioned, just as a few years ago, an HR role, and I'm like, no, no, we don't do that. That does not.
Really?
That's a myth. That's a myth that there's quotas. There's not. It's about good faith efforts to go look for. It means that instead of just posting um, a job at Georgia Tech, you'll also post it at Morehouse and Spelman, right? It's just
Mm.
it's widening the pool,
Mm-hmm.
not saying you have to do anything other than widen the pool and look for and give people the opportunity and really try to consider people fairly. And in order to do that, then we have to look beyond just the procedures. We have to look within ourselves and say, what biases am I holding that might be impacting my decisions, that might be impacting my judgment? And can I get
I'm
help
glad
with it?
you I'm glad you explained that aspect of affirmative action, and just perhaps put to bed anyone that may be listening and still have that misunderstanding about the quota and how it relates to affirmative action. Can you define for us affirmative action as well as DEI and what those acronyms mean?
Yeah. So affirmative action is really procedures, processes, maybe even policy, right? And I think
Mm-hmm.
from so again, old news. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
quote 100%, but
Mm-hmm.
having the Office of Federal Contract Compliance was if you were a government contractor, you actually had to produce a report. I don't know if anybody else had to do it, but if you're a government contractor, which most big companies are, right?
Okay.
Having not been in that role for years now, I don't know if that's still required.
Mm-hmm.
But it that because it was monitored, you had to turn some things in, and you could actually have someone come and check on your policies. Most corporations did the work to do it. And in the so there was affirmative action, like the process of making sure you um, took steps to end discrimination in your company, in your space. You tried to prevent it recurring by allowing opportunities to be opened up for more people. And it could be that you put good faith efforts, like again, my example about going to the schools, like you broaden the schools that you went to. You would put EEOE in your thing. You would do any community outreach in, in multiple communities, not just one, right? So those
Mm-hmm.
were good faith efforts to do that. Then there was the report, which ended up being a real legal document, which you had to document what your good faith efforts were. Well, we went to an all girls school. We did this, we did that. We hosted a high school tour of our facility, whatever it is that you did to kind of encourage people to apply, right? And then
Okay.
you would show your applicant flow, which was here's all the people that flowed through. And even then, you couldn't ask people, you had to kind of do a visual identification of their race
Okay.
and gender.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So you did that.
Which there's a difference now because how things have evolved in
Right. Well, because
society. Yeah.
it's simple, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and people don't always fit a visual
Right.
view, which is another bias that we have, right?
Right.
Like what it looks like for a person to be Asian, black, blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so that's how it was. And you would do a report and you would show how many people applied, and then you would show how many people you hired. And generally speaking, there was an expectation that you would have a mix of people and that the people you hired would represent the mix of people that applied or that you interviewed.
Okay.
Theoretically saying that if 10% women applied, you should have hired 10% women, right?
Okay.
And if you well, and it's not that simple because there was a whole bunch of calculations around trying to prove how many women were really available.
Okay.
So I'm simplifying. So even that isn't like the truth. Maybe it ended up being 5% by the time you did all the calculations. And
Okay.
so theoretically you should do that. But if you had a good reason for not having that there, that would be included as well. And so that was there. So I think that because there was legal oversight from the Office of Federal Contract Compliance on the one hand, that it became a thing. And then, we had a recent decision about the schools. Obviously, I haven't been in academia, so I don't know how the policies were implemented in academia. But the belief was that the standards had been lowered for people. I don't know if that was proven or not proven. I don't know the details of that well, so I don't think I can speak to that. But I think that the impact of that decision has people probably questioning whether that's fair everywhere. But to me, I think companies have probably progressed beyond that enough to take a look at finding the right talent. And even in spaces where, you know, the spaces where it's new and so talent's coming in, I can say that there may not be, so for example, there may not be a lot of CEOs available in tech that are women or people of color because of they haven't entered that space um, at the same time as others, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so, but I can say that there are a lot of women and people of color available in the technology space that can be groomed to grow to do those types of things, right? And
Right.
so, and then we start to look at other factors like why did that happen? And maybe biases were at play there because maybe um, there's research around who can get virtual capital, who can get money to start companies. Who
Right.
does? So why are there more male CEOs in that space? Maybe because that's who could get the money to start companies. And so the bias
Oh,
wasn't necessarily
okay.
from people being in tech, but it may have been what's the bias around who we trust with money to start a company. And that could be a bias based on experience, right?
Okay.
Access to that. So you have to start to think broadly and start to connect the dots and look at where does bias have a play? How do our biases prevent us from seeing the potential in all of us? And how do we educate ourselves to do that? And part of it is just how we build bridges and get to know people that are different than us. I think it's just that simple. I know it's harder to do that
Hmm.
uh, and reach across and build bridges, but to me, it's that simple. If you remember that technically we're all diverse, right? We all have different things, even those of us that look alike or think alike, or just even the 50% of us that are women and the 50% are men, minus the percentages that identify in other ways,
Hmm.
right? So we all are different and we bring something to the table that people may not appreciate or have a bias against. So we probably all felt it. Some of that bias, though, is more harmful than others. You might have a bias against short people or people with that are too tall, but
Uh-huh.
that may not be as painful as the biases that women and people of color have felt, or the biases that lead to deaths. From a religious perspective, that people have experienced in their cultures. So, you know, I would say all biases exist. They're normal, they're human, and we should challenge them. And we should look at where they're impacting things. We should look at where they're limiting our own decisions and work to learn new things. Really is that. How do we learn new things? And I think that's the difference: diversity, equity, and inclusion. The example of equity that I like to share with people, because I think people have seen this, is a picture of a bunch of kids standing at a fence trying to look at a baseball game.
Hmm.
First picture, they're all standing on like a crate. Well, in the second picture, they stack two crates and put the shortest person over. So now she can see. They stack one crate and put the next shortest person over. Now he can see. And the last person was tall enough, didn't even need a crate. Right? So it's like now they can all see. That's equity. It's not necessarily giving somebody more of an advantage. It's
Hmm.
allowing people to see the same thing or to
Yeah.
have access to the same opportunity. You still have to earn it. You still have to earn it. And part of that is, I think, we can see inequities better when we're being inclusive and we're challenging our own biases. Then we start to go, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense. Why wouldn't we give the shortest person two crates to see over the fence when the tall person doesn't even need one? That just makes sense.
Right.
And
Okay.
why would we think that we were giving the shortest person any kind of unfair advantage? No one would think that.
But it starts with acknowledging our own biases
I think so.
in any
And the
situation.
willingness to, and sometimes the way you can find them, I think, is by being inclusive, like looking for psychological safety and starting to look at when you think a certain way. I watched a TED talk, I think it was a TED talk, where a person who was a DEI professional was making a joke about herself. And she
Mhm.
said she got on a and I wish I could remember who this was so I could go find it again. But she got on a plane and there was a female pilot sitting at the door. She's like, "Ooh, yay, girl power. That's awesome."
Mhm.
She said, "But the moment we hit turbulence, I said, oh my God, I hope she can drive this thing." And she goes, "And I'm a DEI professional, you know?" But it's like it's so ingrained. And so
Mm.
that's the thing is that when I say we all have it, we all have it. We all have it. And so we shouldn't shame and blame anyone or cast any kind of stones. The goal is to be curious, have conversation, build relationship, and
Mhm.
work to let everybody be safe. And then when you do that, you create spaces where you can then go, "Oh, why do I believe that? Or why was I thinking that?" That was an example to go, "Why did I think that? Why, if it was a man flying this plane, would I have even had that thought?" Maybe you would have, maybe you wouldn't have. But then you should ask why. Would I have had that? No? Okay, then it's not a bias thing. I'm just scared, right? But,
Okay.
oh, yeah, I did have that. Okay, I wonder why. Do I have a judgment about what women can do? Yeah, all right, let me think about that. Clearly, it's not true. She wouldn't be flying the plane if she wasn't qualified. No one would take that risk.
Okay. And so, what about the inclusion portion of the acronym?
Inclusion is allowing all voices to be heard, right? It doesn't imply agreement. We don't have to agree. I'm not asking you to change your belief. I'm
Mhm.
sharing what is mine. I'm offering you the opportunity to hear another perspective and you can evaluate that. You may or may not change your mind, but
Okay.
just the willingness to be open and to allow people to be heard feels included. Like it says that my voice matters. And I find like that sometimes is enough, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
it's not, but sometimes it's enough to know that you were heard. And when I think about team meetings in a professional setting, people can give you watch outs for that. So back to the challenger example,
Mhm.
you know, could we have prevented that explosion? And then we even had another one years later. So you're like, if you don't pay attention, you can slip back into the same
Pat.
stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because then it
Yeah.
happened again. I'm like, what was that? You know, that shouldn't happen again. We're
Uh-huh.
back to being human, right? So it's
Right.
okay. So what biases got back in the way? How did the conversations change? What happened here that allowed us to have another incident like this? What
Mm.
happened? Right? And that should be the question we all ask ourselves. What led to this? You know, and how do we get there? And we can't ignore the past because the past gives us information. The past can actually expose some of those biases.
Mhm.
And the past is a way to say, oh, well, we marginalized and dehumanized people so we could feel better about ourselves because if we denied their humanity, then we weren't being awful, right? When I think of it in terms of slavery or marginalizing women or the Holocaust, right?
Mhm.
Even those things. And I think it's the history can be that if we're not careful and if we don't open ourselves up to learning from our mistakes, we could do them again.
Mm.
And that's what I get from the NASA thing. It's like if we're not careful and really try to learn from our mistakes, we can do them again. And if we don't question and challenge ourselves when those kinds of things happen, then we're missing out. And we have obviously not heard all that we need to hear from the people we need to hear from. And that in itself should be the space we go, oh, I need to be curious. I need to go have conversations with people that think differently than me and see what else I can learn, see what else we can do. And then if you really understand the benefit that comes from inclusion, you
Mhm.
wouldn't hesitate to do it. You wouldn't hesitate
Mm.
to do it. You would learn, and you'd have to learn how to manage differing opinions and perspectives. How can we have healthy conflict, healthy disagreements, healthy debates so that we get to good decisions? That's the skill that's probably required, right? You don't have to agree, but you need to learn how to debate in ways that don't shut down conversation, that encourage conversation so that all of the things can be put in the common pool of knowledge for everybody to look at when you're making decisions or deciding directions or looking at strategies, all of those things. Personal wise, you look at all those things for how you might want to do things in your family, how you might want to manage things in your relationship, how you might want to raise your kids, how you can consciously choose to not pass on limiting beliefs to your children, right? so that they're not
Because it
holding.
shows up in those spaces for them
Right,
to be inclusive. Okay.
right, right. So that's a lot. I feel like we've gone all over the place today, but I hope that
No, no, you're all good. No, that's very helpful. Okay.
yeah,
So I want to ask,
yes.
so the origins of DEI can actually be traced back to the early 1960s.
Uh, I
Specifically,
I would say so. If you could, I read this article a long time ago. It was really
okay,
good. Rohini Anand and Mary Frances Winters
okay,
um, wrote. Hold on, I wrote it down. A retrospective view of corporate training from 1964 to the present. This was written in
okay.
2008, so it's been a long time since I've seen it. But they walk through the history and talk through how DEI training kind of morphed from that. Like there was an element
Ah,
that started like so. This was the element. Then we went through like an area of sensitivity training, like and all of those things. Like there's been so much. There's been an evolution, and I think and again there this paper was in the early it was 2008, so I'm sure there's more, and I don't know if they've written more since then, but I would
okay,
say that we've had people challenge diversity training. I would say we went from sensitivity training, like how can we be nice and tell each other. To me, it's the business imperative. If you're looking for innovation, creativity, which I would think any company should be looking for, that because things move and morph and change. There's a reason
every
that
day.
we don't have buggy whips. You
Right.
know, iPhone is on what, number 15, 16 version? I mean, it's like
Mhm.
things keep moving and changing, and part of that is being ready for things to change. Generational ideas change. So it's like if you're looking to attract the talent from the Z generation and then the upcoming Alpha generation, the normal perks, benefits, and expectations about what you have at work may no longer apply. So how can
Mhm.
we be creative about that? So it's like really understanding that all those things happen. So for me, the training becomes more around a leadership issue around how do you create psychological safety so that all those voices can, and then how do you learn to manage conflict, and how do you incent collaboration right in those spaces. So I think that we're definitely in the knowledge generation, and it's like to drive that creativity and innovativeness, and that spirit to do so requires that whole space of safety so that people can be willing to put things in the circle and debate them and go, no, let's do that. Like that creative process that happens means you throw things in before you start evaluating them. And if we don't allow people to throw some things in, then that may not happen, right? And so when I think
Okay.
about possible cures for diseases, when I think about, whatever, like how can we move with transportation or less dependency on fossil fuels or anything else? How can we,
Mhm.
leverage all the capabilities and talents we have as a human race and as human beings to really provide all that we need for the future? And it's like let's not marginalize anybody because that's the person who might have that cure.
Ah, okay. So that was going to be the next question that I had for you. So I know you mentioned that there's been an evolution of DE and I. So it started out somewhat with like a sensitivity training. Where would you define where we are now in terms of DE and
Um, I feel like we're in the middle of a flow, right? Because I feel like there's been that little bit of a backlash. I feel like there was some element of seeing that we had a need after George Floyd.
I?
And then I
Mm-hmm.
think there was a backlash of people probably feeling blame and shame. Um, and so there's that. It is to push back against, I'm not a horrible person, I'm not a racist, I'm not this, why do we
Mm-hmm.
need this, right? Or there's
Right.
some unfairness to this that's impacting me. And
Mm-hmm.
so I feel like that people misunderstand what DEI is. Back to, they believe it's a race and gender conversation only, and it's not. It's a much bigger conversation, and it doesn't exclude anybody. Like
Right.
we have to look at all people to be inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
We can't just be just these marginalized people over there and we forget about everybody else. It's everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Inclusion, by definition, is everybody. And
Right.
so if we can have people understand that you're not being left out of the pool, everybody can swim.
Right.
I think we would be a little bit less. defensive, less concerned, less fearful of what it is. And I think people make it something else. And that's why these corporations are, oh, let's do this. Because it's like, no, it's not about um, handing someone a job that may not deserve it. It's not about just randomly promoting women and people of color or people of differing abilities. It's not anything. Diversity is diversity. We all are. That's just a fact. So forget about that. Like we just all are. It's not even something to focus on. It just is. Right. And as we interact with people more around the globe, we should have we should understand that there's different political systems, there's different cultures, there's different beliefs. All of that exists around the world. And if you look at it in a global perspective, we just all are diverse. So fighting what is just doesn't make any sense. But focusing on equity and inclusion, the reason people are fearful of equity, they think they're going to lose something and that something's going to be taken from them. But if we focus on inclusion and allowing the space for people to bring their talents, to grow themselves, people will get their own opportunities, right? And I think as if anyone from a marginalized community can step into their own talents and look to see what limiting beliefs they've internalized and let those go, then they'll start to step into it and create, be willing to take up space and not small themselves for anybody. Understanding that they might be stepping into an opportunity where someone else thinks they're limited, but they know that they're not. And that confidence coming into a situation will start to shift the situations. And then I think inclusion, because it includes everybody, knowing that everybody's ideas need to be put on the table, that's the equity we need. That all the ideas and all the voices are heard. And then the rest, I think we will solve because we're willing to be in those conversations. We're willing to hear all the perspectives and opinions. And that's what I think will move us forward. I think we're in a little bit of a flux right now, but I do think a little bit of change. You know, when in the political arena, and I'm not going to talk about politics, but just as an example, the political arena, there was this, calling Kamala a DEI hire. Well, then I looked, there was a Republican woman that came forward and said, what? And there were Republicans that said, we stop doing that. Focus on the policy, right? And so let's stop doing that. So there was a natural rebuttal to that, you know, and Nikki Haley pointed out that when you're doing this and marginalizing women, all the women that are on your side are getting their backs up. Right. All the Republican women are feeling some kind of way too. Like, this isn't helpful. And so that accountability was called upon within their own party, right? And not that there's not stuff happening on the Democrat side. So again, not political, but just speaking from specifically a DEI conversation happening. That was handled, right, visibly, outwardly. Now, it doesn't mean that people aren't holding on to limiting beliefs, but that's a place to start having a conversation. Why are we doing that? Who is it helping? What's the belief? Why wouldn't we just focus on policy?
So with that, so I want to ask you, in relation to our conversation with this being the election series. So we've heard a lot of conversation specifically around immigration, economics, as well as reproductive rights, which are all important topics. But I wanted to have this conversation because I'm confident that there are policies that have been put in place, bills that have been proposed that people either may have heard about in passing, not been educated on at all, but they do tie into who we choose to cast our vote for. So I wanted to ask you, I wanted to touch on the recent Supreme Court decision that was made in June of 2023. So in June of last year, the Supreme Court made the decision to overturn the affirmative action programs in higher education. And
Mhm.
this was the case of Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus President and Fellows of Harvard College. And this was a 6-3 decision, if I'm quoting that correctly. So, can you help us understand the impact of rulings such as this and the negative impact that rulings such as this have on DE&I efforts?
Right. Um, I, so high level,
Mhm,
I think that decision really gets down to the core of people feeling like they're being treated unfairly and
mhm,
that they're not getting opportunities.
mhm,
And I don't remember if this is true, but it might have been the decision might have been down party lines. So there was clearly um, people seeing it differently. Again, that
mhm,
diversity of thought. Um, I think the potential impact is that people are questioning their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and practices and maybe rolling those back. And I think
mhm.
instead of looking at, do we actually have any unfairness in our situation? That particular college, who knows what they were doing, right?
Right.
Maybe they were trying to be fair and they were lowering standards or doing something different, which I
Mhm,
wouldn't agree to that, right? Back
mhm.
to our conversation, who wants to know they were admitted because standards were lower versus I'm admitted because I'm good enough, right?
Right.
Um, but I do think that it had us question whether DEI was fair or not, versus looking at why did we even start with these policies? Because we had so much unfairness to begin with,
Mhm.
and that the intention was just to provide a level playing field.
Right.
Have we gotten there yet? I personally don't think so. I don't know. But I feel like we have an opportunity back to owning our biases. And the thing about
Uh-huh.
this decision about anything else in DEI is that we don't really understand or we haven't addressed the role that biases play in that. Because if we are really addressing biases, we wouldn't probably have to worry about it. If we were
Mhm,
really addressing biases and making sure they were not way of our decisions, we probably wouldn't be erring on the side of marginalizing people and leaving them out, or lowering standards and letting them in and lowering standards and not having the same expectations. We probably wouldn't do either of those things. We'd probably be more down the middle, right?
mhm.
And so I think what it should have done was had us question what we're doing and be curious and look at what's the right thing to be putting in place.
Okay.
Um, what I think it may have done is just say, "Oh, we don't need these policies anymore," without examination. And I
I
don't
agree
say that's
with
true for everybody, but I do think
that.
that that is a particular way that can happen. I do feel like corporations, though, understand their bottom line,
Mhm,
understand what their customers may want,
mhm,
and may know that some of these things are important from a business perspective and may
mhm,
still look forward with those. But I feel like if you just say DEI is out, you still have to look at inclusion and psychological safety and employee engagement. And to me,
mhm,
all of those things come back to inclusion, right? All of that comes back to respecting diversity because it just
mhm,
is. Like I said, even a group of white men are diverse.
mhm.
And if you're not recognizing that, then your policies and your practices and your group think might result in a challenger explosion or implosion, right?
Right. Okay.
So I think that I'm hoping that it becomes the question, what do we do instead? I don't know yet. I think it's still kind of too soon to see all of the impact that may happen
Mhm,
from this. But we see a lot of organizations making the statement they're not doing that.
mhm.
Um, so I think we'll see. I wonder when people are going to figure out they have to fill the gap. 'Cause I think that will come soon too. I think
Okay.
it'll come soon too. Right now, I'd say we're still in a state of flux. I think that there's enough people that see the benefit of it, that understand what it really is intended to do, um, and understand that sometimes people may have abused it or misused it in a way that's caused a problem, and that
Mhm.
we're dealing with that now.
I can see that. I agree with you. You're the expert on this topic. To be transparent, my fear is that the mindset will be, oh, well, we don't really need this policy. I do agree with you also that there are, on the other side of the argument, there are people that do see value in affirmative action, in DE&I. But with that, there's always an opposing side, right? And with
Right.
the opposing side, what I'm seeing right now is a lot of fear around uh, voices that have been amplified for centuries, them feeling that having more seats at the table means that they're losing their voice and their inclusion. And again, you are the expert on this. I'm not, but my observation is that there has always been space at the table made for these people in particular that have these arguments. So I feel like it's more of just a power struggle in general.
Probably some of that is true. I do think some of
Mm-hmm.
that is true about who has the power and who doesn't. And that is
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the ways we're socialized too. And I think
Right.
that is a fear. And I just think that when you look at the facts, they're never excluded from the table.
No.
They own the table,
Mm-hmm.
and it now, instead of it just depending on your power to just do it, it now requires that you interact with people, consider ideas, because there's
Mm-hmm.
still decision making that happens that not everybody is privy to,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you now maybe just need to build up your influence skills.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying this is how it's going to be, you may have to influence people. And if you're making good business sense, people are going to follow you regardless, right? Because that's going to make good business sense. But you're going to have to
Right.
really think about it, and you can't just mandate it, and you can't just be looking out for yourself. But that is leadership versus just power, right? And so I think
Yes.
the goal is, if you want to have power, then you probably need to lead in better ways,
Mm-hmm.
and then people will entrust you with that as well. So part of it, I think, is the fear of
Yeah.
I'm losing something versus I'm adding people to the conversation. And that, I think, is um, I think that's the fear, but that comes back
Mm-hmm.
down to a bias as well to take a look at. And then I think, to be fair, if we're going to be inclusive, we need to understand that perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and know that it's a valid perspective as well, even if we're in the space of disagreeing with it,
Mm-hmm.
because then we can bring a more nuanced perspective to the conversation.
Okay.
When you're the one that's able to hold multiple ideas and hold the space for disagreement and conversation, you can create a dialogue that allows voices to be heard. If voices are heard, then there's an opportunity for opinions to be changed. But if you don't ever have it, and this is where I say you come with a fire instead of a bridge, if you create it as just a fight and an argument to push back and demand someone to admit that they're wrong,
Mm-hmm.
versus appreciating that they've been socialized to have a different perspective and trying to understand it, you don't invite conversation. And to me, inviting conversation and relationship is what starts to build the bridge, right?
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Because then people come to you for conversation. In
Mm-hmm.
my tenure as an HR leader, I've actually had a group of white men come to me and say, "Hey, we're we recognize the value of diversity, but we don't know how to make our own team diverse. And we realized that we were sitting around the table trying to solve this, and we all look the same. Like, we need
Mm-hmm.
so we're coming to you. Can you come sit at the table with us?"
Mm-hmm.
So there are people that get it. There are people
And
that get it.
so, what would you say to someone who may be in a professional setting right now and feel discouragement because they're encountering people who not only don't get it, but have no desire to get it?
Right. You do have to choose where you spend your time.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a professional setting. The one thing you can do, and this is just generic, so I mean, without
Mm-hmm.
knowing anybody's personal situation, one thing you can do that will make a difference would be to build relationships.
Mm-hmm.
When you build relationships, you create a bridge. And when you build relationships, you now have the opportunity to go say something to someone because you have a relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
You give yourself voice through relationships. And for those that are steadfast in their racism, sexism, whatever ism they're stuck in, that
Mm-hmm.
may not be the relationship you want to build. You may go build some other ones,
Right. Okay.
right? And so you just use that. You know, where can you make a difference? Where can your experience help shift some perspective? Where can you increase your own learning by interacting
Okay.
with someone else and shift your
Mhm.
own biases, right?
Okay.
And go to those places as well.
Okay. No,
Have you?
I think that's great advice because
Yeah.
I'm confident that unfortunately someone, yes, the positivity and that aspect of people wanting to know more, that does exist.
Hmm.
But then the other side of it of resistance
Oh,
also
for sure.
exists,
Well,
you
that's what
know,
we're
and
seeing.
and that's a very lonely and isolating space to be in
Right.
when this is a place where you spend a majority of your time for creating a livelihood for yourself. So I think that's great advice in terms of how to
Well, the other
navigate
thing that you said earlier is also great advice. The thing you said earlier is you sometimes walk into spaces and you go, oh, and you don't feel safe right away. But then you
that.
started building bridges. Like you started talking to people and you started understanding that. So
Hmm.
the more we can own that that's our power too. So for women and people of color and other marginalized folks, when you walk in and you choose to build relationships and you do that right up from the beginning,
Hmm.
you are vulnerable, but you're exposing yourself and the talents that you have by building relationships with others, right?
Yes.
And through that, you can start to shift people's perspective just because they've gotten to know you. And then you start to create the safety in your own space. You don't wait for permission, you're putting it in place for yourself.
Hmm.
And that's the other thing that it provides. So when we make the assumption that we walked into a space and it's not safe, I'm not saying that it's not wrong. You should look to make
Hmm.
sure you're safe, right? Because you may not
Right.
be. But the moment you start building relationships, you start to increase your own safety in the space.
Okay.
And you might find that you have more allies there than you thought. Because I
Yeah.
believe that there's a resistant factor, but I don't think it's as big as we think it is. I think it's just loud.
Hmm. Okay. Can you expand on that?
So I feel like there's extremist.
Uh-huh.
You think of a normal standard deviation curve, all of that at the end is not that big a percentage.
Okay.
Get to the middle. And I just feel when you look at the US, we're probably more centrist overall, and we're not on either extreme, but
Okay.
the extremes can be very loud.
And so
And
the
some
louder
people,
the extremes, it
the more
can,
you think it's everybody, and
yeah.
I don't think it is. Now, I don't have any scientific data to back up this perspective other than my understanding of the standard, natural curves, the standard
Uh-huh.
deviations. That to me says that would intuitively apply here as well. And when you think about it, you could probably identify the extremist groups that are out there, and it's not the majority.
Okay. I can receive that. I feel
Yeah,
encouraged
yeah,
from that statement.
yeah, yeah. And when you are feeling discouraged, it's like take a look at what's the limiting belief that you have. Is it something about yourself that you were like, oh, they don't see me as equal because
Yes.
I'm blah 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 blah. And then it's like, but wait, I see me as equal. If I see me as equal, how would I act in this space? If I see me as just as good as, how would I act in this space? If I know I'm talented and capable, how would I act in this space?
Hmm.
How can I let go of this limiting belief that society said, fill in the blank, women, person of color, differing ability, Jewish, Muslim, whatever your religion is, said that I wasn't.
Hmm.
Who is the A?
That's very
What are you
true.
talented
Because people
against?
can only make you feel, yeah, people can only make you feel inferior with your consent. So
Right. Was it
I receive.
Eleanor Roosevelt is like, what people think
Hmm.
of me is not my business. What other people,
Hmm.
something like that. Like carry
Yeah.
that around. Or as Tabitha
Hmm.
Brown would say, that's your business.
That's your business. In the words of Auntie Tabitha. No, I like that.
Yes.
So I want to touch with that. I think this is a great segue to touch on Florida's "Don't Say Gay,"
Uh-huh.
which has gained quite a bit of attention, along with their Stop Woke Act.
Mhm.
Now, the Stop Woke Act, it was blocked temporarily in 2022, and both of these bills are essentially isolated to the state of Florida. But even though they're isolated to the state of Florida, can you help us understand the impact of these laws on a larger scale for citizenship throughout the U.S. in
Uh,
relation to DE&I?
so what I find interesting, again, I'm not
Mhm.
the political expert. I wish I could
Mhm.
ask my son. We have
Mhm.
interesting debates, but
Yes.
I will say this: I noticed that um, I feel like Florida authored those things.
Mhm.
When Florida put a person on the national stage to become president,
Mhm.
nothing moved forward on that end.
This is true.
So
This
again, I
is,
say
you know what, Cherie?
you have the
This is
extremes,
true.
you have right. So that didn't get pushed forward, and I
Uh-huh.
would say it was a reaction to that pander. Like the laws themselves are reactions that pander to fear, and
Yes. Very much so. I agree with that.
and addressing problems that didn't even exist, right? Maybe.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
for every example, there's someone that can say, "Oh, there was this teacher that did something inappropriate in class." Okay,
Mhm.
that that could be true, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, but I think you can put the limits so tight that you really are just being ridiculous. Like you can make the limits so tight. So yeah, I think it's inappropriate to have certain conversations with elementary school kids.
Mhm.
I don't think it's appropriate to teach sex ed
Mhm.
at elementary school, but
Right.
there is a point where it becomes appropriate and that information is important so that we can avoid
Right.
problems too, like people
Very much.
understanding where
Mhm.
pregnancy happens or understanding sexually transmitted diseases or understanding all those
Mhm.
types of things. But you wait till the mind is more mature. And so we're reacting to things where people are talking about critical race theory. That isn't even taught. That's like a law school conversation, right? So we're
Mhm.
overreacting to things and we're instilling fear in people about, oh,
Mhm.
we're indoctrinating our children. Uh, no. As a matter of fact, I would argue that because we don't really give our whole history, we're socializing our children without all the facts, right?
Yes.
So the
100%.
second so
100%.
okay, so you look at the reaction, and I know this is not what you asked about, but you look at
No, no, it's okay.
like the things around abortion laws, like they're
Mhm.
so extreme
Mhm.
that people are dying,
Yes.
and right because we're asking politicians to be medical professionals. What?
And you're not you're a politician for a reason, and they're a medical professional for a reason. They spent a number of years
Right, but you
learning
charge
this
them,
information. Yeah.
right, and their oath to do no harm. Now they have to let
Mhm.
people die. That's just
Mhm.
insane to me. And we're talking the extremes again, right? And so
No, I'm following
to
you.
the
We're
Florida
tracking.
thing, I feel like it hasn't it like the stage that the national stage that Florida put their person on, that person didn't move forward was a statement to me, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, I hope the Stop Woke Act gets there, but again, it comes back to people being confused as to what we're talking about.
Mhm.
In trying to create opportunity for everybody, it doesn't negate the people that are already there.
Mhm.
That's not these policies. Those policies aren't built that way. They're
Mhm.
built to increase opportunity, not to take
Mhm.
away from anybody. And what happens is we get all involved in fear, and people believe things without having all the facts. So thinking that like there's people that want to teach your child to be gay,
Yeah.
let's understand how that happens, right? Like that
Mhm.
doesn't happen.
Exactly.
That's not how that happens,
Mhm.
right? And so I think it's about having an education and an understanding. And
Mhm.
the more that we're educated and not operating off of fear talk. And I think that's one of the things that happens is that people will believe things from politicians or pastors or other people without going and doing the research for themselves. And again,
Mhm.
this is where generational limiting beliefs get passed down because we don't question. We
Mhm.
don't. question where, why we believe this, where do we get that from? And isn't there new information out there now that might, like Pluto's not even a planet anymore. Like things change. Like, can you just take a look around and try to educate yourself
Mm-hmm.
around things that you may not know? And if you have a fear about something, that's the place you should start to take a look at it and understand what it is.
I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Taking a look at it from that aspect instead of looking for extremist
Right,
policies to be put in place.
right.
And so I want to ask you to educate our listeners as well as myself. Can you help us understand the role that is played based upon the Senate, the House, who holds presidential office, what type of effect that has on affirmative action, DE&I efforts? Can you educate us on that?
Wow. I think that's a bigger conversation. I can educate us on that. What I can say is that
Mm-hmm.
we operate with three branches of government so that no
Mm-hmm.
one person holds all the power. And
Mm-hmm.
take it would take collaboration. It would take the skills you need to be inclusive. It would take
Mm-hmm.
knowing how to have healthy debate. Right now, I think we don't do that. We play partisanship, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know the politics really has nothing to do with, are we taking care of America? So first of all, if
Mm-hmm.
we got around to looking at collaboration, looking at how to have healthy conflict and debate, and really thinking about the country versus think about having power, then
Mm-hmm.
you might see different results. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I can say that I can say this. I think sometimes people believe they're doing the right thing and they feel very passionate about it and they think they are helping people.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like then that's where the ruthless compassion comes in. It's like, how do you have compassion for people? And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a matter of, there's a reason we separate church and state because belief is not always factual, it's belief. And so, you know what I'm saying? It's a very
Yes.
different thing. And so
100%.
when you try to create laws and constructs for people across the board, knowing that there's multiple religions and beliefs out there,
Mm-hmm.
you have to separate that, right? Because you can't accommodate that. But
Right.
there are probably some things we can all agree upon, like murder is wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then when you start looking at some of the other policies around what's fair and what's not fair, it can be a little bit harder to say that. And just
Mm-hmm.
even in the case of abortion, it's like, where does that become murder versus where is that a procedure? And
Mm-hmm.
there's disagreement on when does life start, and that's not there. So just
Right.
because someone believes life starts at one point doesn't make that an accurate statement when it comes to the actual medical health and science.
Right. Okay.
So I think that anybody holding office has a responsibility to the people of the country,
Mm-hmm.
their responsibility to try to act for the well-being. And I think that we as in the United States plays a little bit too much partisanship,
Mm-hmm.
and we've become accustomed to doing that. I would say that I would like to believe that most of the people are operating off of good intention and trying to do the right thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I do think that some people are operating off of a need to have power and control, and they still might believe that they're doing the right thing, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, but that's why it's important to vote, um, so that you can say who you think will represent those interests for you, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think the lesson that we have to learn is how to be more inclusive everywhere. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that we see diversity in the House and Senate. We see it on the Supreme Court, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we still have room to learn around collaboration and conflict management and about understanding other people's perspectives. And when you're in a role like that, it's not just about what you think.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be about what the people you represent think, and holding yourself as just one of those opinions, not the opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a personal opinion that I have about how it should work, and then there's reality of how it does work.
Mm-hmm.
And
No,
so I
I
think
think.
it depend on to answer about how this affects DEI. I think it's everything, because I think, reproductive rights is a DEI conversation, in my opinion. Um,
Oh,
you
I never
know,
thought in that
yeah,
aspect.
I think that is. And I think there's other things that are also there. But yeah, yeah. I think the intention of affirmative action around creating opportunities is one that makes sense. I would say that more opportunities have been provided. So should the focus move to inclusion and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing what diversity is? Maybe. Like I said, I think we're in flux, but I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the conversations that we need to be having. Maybe in government, definitely in businesses, because there's a direct correlation to businesses around their own productivity and performance and innovation that comes from understanding that, and getting business results from having psychological safe workplaces, right? To me, that makes sense. And that's the environment that I've come from and apply my knowledge in.
Mm-hmm.
Not in politics. My thoughts on politics are really just an opinion and perspective, but that would be my perspective, is that if we had better skill sets all around conflict, collaboration, and understanding the necessity to hear all the voices and create a space for that, and how that can um, empower our country and empower our people, I think we would maybe do more of that.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. I think that's a great way to answer that question in terms of the effect, thinking about who represents those qualities that you
Yeah,
desire to see in this. So
right.
I agree with that. I think that's a great answer.
Yeah.
And so I always close it out by asking our guest one style related question.
Uh-huh.
So, my question for you is, what piece in your closet gives you that I have arrived type
Oh,
confidence when you step into any type of professional setting? This
yeah.
can be a clothing piece, this can be a piece of jewelry, it
Uh-huh.
can be a certain, like your favorite lipstick, a certain pair of shoes. Just
Yes.
talk to us, girl. Tell us what it is.
Yes. So I love color. I love color. And I
Okay.
feel like, and I think why it is I feel like, and I grew up with the corporate uniform, people wearing blue suits and things like that. And so
Hmm.
it's a
Yeah.
tiny act of rebellion, and a way to
Mhm.
say, we can think more broadly about what you wear to work. You
Yes.
can show up by a power, like owning who you are, like owning who you are. And I remember being, told like what's appropriate for corporate America. And it's like, it's a suit. It's like, but bringing color into the conversation is a
Hmm.
way of bringing your personal style to the conversation, and not necessarily giving way to the uniform of corporate America, right?
Yes.
And like making it personal, making your thing. And because color is sometimes unexpected in corporate spaces, you stand
Mhm.
out.
This is true. This is true. I love that. I love the boldness of color, and it just helps you step into a space. And it's very much like, I'm here, I'm prepared to share myself
Yeah.
and share who I am, my ideas, and bring it to the table. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah. It's like, even what I'm wearing now, it's like, oh, if it's blue, the two blues,
Yes.
the solid color, but just even bringing a little bit of, femininity and softness to the outfit versus, just a navy jacket or something like that on top of it.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. Well, you have given us an immense amount of knowledge and so many things to think about. Like I told you at the beginning of our episode, you definitely have given me some things to think about as I go forward. So I want to give you the opportunity to tell our listeners about any upcoming projects that you have. I know you have an amazing webinar series that is going on
Yes.
right now. So tell them about that. Any other projects that you have coming up that you'd like to share,
Okay.
and where we can find you and keep up with you.
Okay, great. So Cherie Caldwell Company is my site, and I'm also on LinkedIn. And I think hopefully I've sent you a QR code that you can add into the notes that people can use to find me. So I am doing a Women in Transition webinar series, and I'm co-hosting that with a financial planner, and we're trying to bring both sides of the conversation, like your life and your finances, right? And we're going through different transitions that can affect people. The first session was on divorce, widowhood, and separation, and it's not for people that are going through something or have been through something. It's for women to think proactively about their lives and all the things that can happen and go through, so that you're prepared for the unexpected, right? I had a young woman attend who's not married, not in danger of divorce or separation, but wants to be a resource for her mom because her stepdad has dementia. So she's thinking proactively, like, and we remember that women tend to live longer. So
Yes.
widowhood is a likely state. Hopefully not divorce and separation, but at 50% rates, it could happen, right? The next session, we're looking at, what happens on the job. Like, how are you dealing with layoffs, retirement, all those types of things that might be unexpected. Then we have the next one on marriage, and like how that, like the whole thing, like there's marriage, children, all those things, being a part of the sandwich generation, empty nesters, all those transitions that we go through. And then I think we wrap it up with just career in general. So there's 3 sessions. The next one is October 16th. So that's coming up. And then I'm working with a coach for ADHD leaders, and we're working on a webinar. We don't have a date for that yet, but we're looking at what can we do to help inspire and empower neurodivergent leaders and help them and support them, and the people that work with them they work for, and how to help them with that. So hopefully we'll do that by the end of the month or beginning of November. So that'll be going on. And then just my business is around coaching and about helping people as individuals understand limiting beliefs that we talked about and overcome those and move past those and step into utilizing their full talents, and amplifying their own voices. And then as it relates to teams, like helping teams understand how they need to work together, especially leadership teams, how they can work better together by understanding how to collaborate and have healthy conflict, and then understand how they impact their organization so that they can bring that all the way through. So looking at organizational health, for example, and then helping them utilize the skills they need to kind of create the right environment to get high performance, higher productivity, high customer satisfaction. All that comes from having engaged employees. And so looking at the things that drive organizational health to do that. And of course, I'm a full believer that inclusion is a foundational piece of that. So that's what I'm up to.
Well, I want to encourage all of my listeners to check out the webinar series. I'll be sure to link the registration site in the episode bio, because by the time this episode airs, they will still have a full week prior to that next episode, which is the 16th. The next one would be the 16th. So they'll have a whole week to register and hear more from you and just engage with you. And then I also want to encourage, I understand there's probably an evaluation process for you, for your company, but I want to encourage any organizations, any entrepreneurs that may be listening and have been intrigued by listening to you and know that they have a need for your services to absolutely reach out. Cherie is amazing, as you heard in this episode, and I can only imagine the things that she can do when she's able to get within an organization and really put these things in practice. So I just want to encourage you all with that. And Cherie, I want to thank you for spending time with us to educate all of us, to share and, awaken different things within us to evaluate ourselves, our own biases, and just ways that, we may have been even marginalizing ourselves. So I thank you so much for your knowledge and coming onto the podcast. And I cannot wait to hear the reaction from this episode.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate the opportunity, and I will talk to you soon.
Yes. And with that, we are out, Style Crew. Hey, Style Crew. Make sure you're keeping up with our podcast through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, as well as the Podcast Index. And if you'd like to view the podcast visually, check out my YouTube channel, Styled by Jessica Lauren. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at style_and conversation podcast.